23rd. The Emperor better. Pass. Napoleon had sent for the children of the Grand Marshal. He played and frolicked with them and excited them himself to be noisy. Little Arthur got out of temper and began to grumble. "What is the matter with you, little urchin?" "What do you say?" said the Emperor to him, making him jump and laugh at the same time, in spite of himself. "This little fellow," said Napoleon to me, "is as independent as I was at his age, but the fits of passion to which I often gave way proceeded from more excusable motives. I leave you to judge." I had been placed in a school of young ladies, the mistress of which was known to our family, and, being a pretty boy, and the only one there, I was caressed by every one of my fair schoolfellows. I might generally be seen with my stockings down and covering half my shoes, and in our walks I constantly held the hand of a charming little girl who was the cause of many broils and quarrels. My malicious comrades, jealous of my campagne, combined these two circumstances together in a song which they made, and whenever I appeared in the street they followed me singing Napoleon di mezza calzetta fa l'amor a Giacometta. I could not bear to be laughed at, seizing sticks or stones or anything that came in my way. I rushed into the midst of the crowd. Fortunately, it always happened that somebody interfered and got me out of the scrape, but the number opposed to me never stopped me. I never reckoned how many there were. The children withdrew, and the conversation then became serious and turned by degrees upon the events which followed the return from Egypt. The Emperor entered into numerous details relative to the Battle of Marengo and gave an account of that day very similar to what I had already heard. The army of reserve assembled at Dijon enabled me to pass rapidly into Germany or Italy as circumstances might require. The season favored me a little, for the monks of St. Bernard assured me that the snow disappeared that year 20 days sooner than usual. Our army, harassed by the passage of the Alps, was very well received by these monks. I had informed them of our approach and sent them money, and they supplied us with provisions and excellent wine. The monks of St. Bernard form an order of the highest respectability, and their establishment is one of those institutions which governments should never destroy, but on the contrary protect and encourage by every means in their power. On entering Italy, I found myself immediately on the rear of the enemy and master of his magazines and equipage. I had obtained great advantages, and once in Stradella, the campaign might be considered as closed. Had Genoa held out, I should have remained firm in my entrenched camp of Stradella, one of the strongest positions of Italy. I had on the Po 5 bridges, which facilitated my communication with the divisions of Chevron, Le Poitou, and Montserrat, which I might call to my assistance if attacked, or assist if the enemy annoyed them. To reestablish his communications, Mr. de Mellis would have been obliged to offer me battle on ground chosen by myself, being a plain intersected with woods very favorable to my infantry, but in which his cavalry could do nothing, whilst I had all my troops at my disposal. The capture of Genoa entirely changed the face of affairs. From that moment, the enemy had a secure retreat, very advantageous positions. He could retire to Genoa and defend himself there by receiving provisions by sea, or place batteries on the heights of Bobbio. And in spite of all my efforts, enter Plasencia, retake Mantua and Peschiera, place himself in communication with Austria, and obliged me to carry on a defensive war. My plan of campaign was frustrated. An expedient offered itself to my mind, and I resolved to risk the attempt. I left Milan, made 32 leagues in 7 hours, and fought the Battle of Montebello. We won it, and that victory obliged the enemy to evacuate Genoa, but it also weakened my army, and I was reduced to draw reinforcements from the division stationed on the other side of the Po to defend the entrance into the Milanese states. It is true that these divisions were not more than 3 leagues from me, but they could not join me under 3 days of march, being obliged to pass through Plasencia Lombardia or Stradella. Another circumstance also operated against me. The country between Montebello and Alessandria is an extensive plain, very favorable to the German cavalry. I nevertheless made up my mind to make a partial attack, for I was placed in an extraordinary situation and risked little to gain a great deal. If I should be beaten, I retired to my entrenched camp at Stradella across the Po over my 5 bridges, protected by my batteries without the possibility of opposition on the part of the enemy. Joined my 1st Division with the corps of Monse, Lecce, and Taro, although one of the corps of Melas to pass the Po, which was all he wished for, and then superior number I could attack him with all my forces. If I shall be victorious, I obtain the same results. The army of Melas, blocked up between us and the river, would have been obliged to lay down its arms and to surrender all its forts. Had I been beaten, which I think was impossible, I should have engaged a regular war and called in the aid of Switzerland. Determined to give battle, I ordered an account to be presented to me of the effective state of my army. I had altogether 26,000 men, and Melas had 40,000, of whom 18,000 were cavalry. At 2 o'clock in the morning, a report was brought to me that the enemy had attacked our vanguard and that our troops were giving way. The French soldiers did not like to be attacked. Our troops were falling back rather in disorder. The enemy had already taken some prisoners, and we had lost a league and a half of ground in our retreat. The generals commanding the vanguard, Lannes, Murat, and Berthier, sent me message after message informing me that the troops were flying and that they could not stop them. They asked me to send them reinforcements and entreated me to march with my reserve. I answered to all, hold out as long as you can, and when you can no longer maintain your ground, retire. I perceived that the Austrians had not engaged their reserve, and in such cases the great point is to endeavor to oblige the enemy to employ all his forces, whilst we husband our own, and to induce him to attack flanks before he perceives his mistake. For the difficulty is to force him to bring forward his reserve. The enemy had 44,000 men against 20,000 at most, and even those 20,000 were in disorder. Melas had, therefore, only to follow up his success. I placed myself in front of the 1st Legion in a rich uniform, and at the head of a demi-brigade attacked and drove back the Austrians and broke through the ranks. Melas, seeing me at the head of my army and his own legions repulsed, thought that I had arrived with my reserve to stop the troops that were retreating, and therefore advanced with the whole of his own reserve, consisting of 6,000 Hungarian grenadiers, the flower of his infantry. This corps filled up the gap I had made and attacked us in our turn. I then gave way, and during a retreat of half a league, exposed to their fire, I rallied the whole army and reformed its line of battle as soon as I had joined my reserve, consisting of 6,000 men and 15 pieces of cannon under the orders of Desailly, who was then my sheet anchor. By a rapid maneuver, I deployed all my forces, formed with my army, the 2 wings of the division of Desailly, and opposed to the enemy 6,000 men of fresh troops. A powerful discharge of artillery and a desperate charge with bayonets broke through their line and cut off the 2 wings. I then ordered Kellerman to attack with 800 horse. He advanced, and with these 800 horse separated the 6,000 Hungarian grenadiers from the remainder of the army before the very eyes of the Austrian cavalry. This cavalry, however, was half a league off and required a quarter of an hour to arrive on the field of actions. And I have observed that is always those quarters of an hour that decide the fate of a battle. The troops of Kellerman threw the Hungarian grenadiers upon our infantry, and they were immediately taken prisoners. The Austrian cavalry now arrived, but our infantry was in a line with its artillery in front, and a dreadful discharge and a barrier of bayonets obliged this body of cavalry to fall back, and it retired rather in disorder. I then followed with 3 regiments that had just joined me. It deployed. I drove it before me, and a great part of it was drowned in attempting to pass the bridge of the Bormida, which is very narrow. What remained was pursued till dark. I learned after the battle from some general officers that the Austrians, even in the midst of their first successes, were not without feeling a degree of uneasiness. They had a secret foreboding of their defeat. During the action, they questioned our prisoners and asked them, "Where is General Bonaparte?" in the rear guard. And those who had already fought against me in Italy and who knew my custom of reserving myself for the end exclaimed, "Our task is not yet over." They also confessed that on seeing me in the first line, they had been completely deceived by the stratagem and had believed that my reserve was engaged. In all battles, a moment occurs when the bravest troops, after having made the greatest efforts, feel disposed to fly. That terror proceeds from a want of confidence in their own courage, and it only requires a slight opportunity, a pretense to restore confidence to them. The great art is to give rise to the opportunity and to invent the pretense. At Arcole, I won the battle with 25 horsemen. I seized that moment of lassitude in the two armies. I perceived that the Austrians, although old soldiers, would not have been sorry to be in their camp, and that our Frenchmen, however brave, wished themselves under their tents. The whole of my forces had been engaged. I had been obliged to reform them in order of battle several times, and had only 25 guides left. These I sent on the flank of the enemy, with 3 trumpets sounding the charge. A general cry was heard throughout the Austrian ranks of, "Here is the French cavalry!" And they fled. It is true that the proper moment must be seized. 1 minute sooner or later, that attempt would have proved useless. Even though I had sent 2,000 horse for the infantry, would have made a converted by its artillery and opened its fire, and the cavalry would not have even attacked. You thus see the two armies are two bodies which meet and endeavor to frighten each other. A moment of panic occurs, and that moment must be turned to advantage. All that is merely the effect of a mechanical and moral principle. It only requires habit, and when a man has been present in many actions, he distinguishes that moment without difficulty. It's as easy as the casting up of an addition. The first time I entered Italy, I found there a government rather despotic, it is true, but whose administration was mild. But now everything was altered. The country was agitated by a most furious reaction, and every individual who had anything to do with us had been thrown into prison and fined. I had appointed men of the Austrian party to various situations in the Cisalpine Republic because my system is to neutralize the sentiments of the great mass of the people in order that the country where I make war may not become a closed arena. Well, all these persons so placed by me had been looked upon with an evil eye on account of the hatred born of revolutionists. Add to this that the English, the Russians, and the Turks, by despising the religion of the country in proportion to the scrupulousness with which they observe their own, had quite indisposed the Italians, who pay much more attention to the outward forms of religion than we do in France. The German paper money was also at a discount of 60%, and yet the inhabitants were obliged to receive it as coin. This circumstance completed the entire estrangement of the affection of the Italians from Austria, and when the former saw that we paid for everything in cash, they were delighted and exclaimed, "Here are the French louis come back again."